Last up for this worksheet is topic 5, where we're going to have factors that are opposites. So this is a little tricky and sometimes it can be a little daunting to wrap your head around it, but consider the following, okay? We have x minus 2 divided by 2 minus x. Well, our gut instinct is that something should happen here because we have x's and we have 2's, right? The issue is in the top, or the numerator, the x is positive, the 2 is negative, whereas in the denominator, the 2 is positive and the x is negative. That makes the numerator and denominator opposites, okay? So here's what we can do. We like to have things in standard form. That means we want all of the terms in order from highest degree to lowest degree ending in the constant. So when I look at these two components, the numerator and denominator, the numerator is in standard form. I have the first degree term and then I have the constant second, okay? So the denominator needs a little bit of work. It's not in standard form. So let's put it in standard form. Well, if I have 2 minus x, I would put it in standard form by writing it as negative x plus 2. Well, that's even closer because at that point we would have x minus 2 over negative x plus 2. So we're like, dang, that really looks like it should factor or it should simplify somehow. We've got these x's, we've got these 2's, just needs a little bit of work. So what we can do is we can take this right here and factor out a -1. Remember when we've had those situations where the lead term is negative and we want to factor out a negative GCF, the same thing is going to happen here. We want to factor out that -1. So you can see right here, that's what we're doing. We're factoring out that -1. Well, when we do that, that's going to give us the x minus 2 over the -1 times x minus 2. Now we're cooking. Now this is something where we can see the numerator and denominator clearly have a common factor. They have a common factor of x minus 2. So I know that x minus 2 and x minus 2, when we divide them, we just get 1. But you just have to remember we have this negative right here. This negative right here is going to make this simplify not to +1, but to -1. So when you have factors that are opposites, if you play around just a little bit, you can do some simplifying. So you find the factor that's not in standard form, you put it in standard form, you factor out the -1 because we don't want that lead term to be negative, and then you do some simplifying, okay? So what I've written out here is the numerator and denominators are opposites because they differ only in the sign on each term. If you factor either the numerator or denominator and factor out the common factor, you will be left with -1. Okay, so you want to factor either the numerator or the denominator by factoring out that -1 GCF. Will say you simplify and you're left with just a -1. Okay, so let's look at an example. Part A is almost identical. Okay, so the directions here say simplify each rational expression completely. Well, I have x minus 7 over 7 minus x. Again, we're like, oh, this should simplify. We've got these x's, these 7's, just those signs are off. So look for the portion of this rational expression that is not in standard form. That would be the denominator in this case. So I'm going to rewrite this as x minus 7. I like the numerator, it's in standard form. I don't like the denominator, it's not in standard form. So I'm going to rewrite it as negative x plus 7. Well, that's great. We're sort of close, but you can see really clearly here that we don't have the same signs. So let's see if we can factor out a GCF in that denominator. Remember, when the lead term is negative, we need to make our GCF negative. So here we're going to factor out a GCF of -1. So my numerator is still x minus 7. My denominator, I want to factor out a -1. Well, when I divide each of those terms in the original denominator by -1, I'm going to end up with x minus 7 because negative x divided by -1 is positive x. Positive 7 divided by -1 is -7. So now I can see that my x minus 7 factors, we say they cancel. X minus 7 divided by itself is just 1. But remember, we have this negative right here. So this simplifies really to 1 over -1 or just -1. Okay, so be careful with these opposites. They are going to show up, in most of these sections. We'll see a little something with opposites come up, and I'll try to make a point to go over at least one example every time we try something new. Now, looking at part B, we've got a little bit more involved. We look at the numerator and denominator, and they're just not even close to being the same. However, when I look at the numerator, hopefully your gut is like, I see something I recognize here. You've got two terms, you're subtracting, and they're both perfect squares. So the numerator all on its own is the difference of perfect squares. So when I have x squared minus 4, I see that I'm subtracting two terms that are both perfect squares. I find the square roots of those terms. So the square root of x squared is just x. The square root of 4 is 2. So I can now say that the numerator is x plus 2, x minus 2. And my denominator, I don't like it. It's not in standard form. So I'm going to rewrite my denominator by putting it in standard form. So I'm going to write it as negative x plus 2. Well, it looks like it should cancel because we've got an x plus 2 in the top, but then we've got a negative x plus 2 in the bottom. So they don't cancel because the negative x is not quite right. But then we look at the other side, we've got the x minus 2. Well, we're close there, but our signs are just off. So things are just off here. So let's see if we can fix our denominator. So when the lead term is negative, we like to factor out at least a -1. So let's do that. My numerator is good to go for now, so we'll just rewrite it. But my denominator, I want to factor out a -1. So when I factor out that -1, that's going to leave me with x minus 2 because negative x divided by -1 is positive x. And then positive 2 divided by -1 is -2. Now we can see, hey, we do for sure have a common factor. X minus 2 in the top divided by x minus 2 in the bottom just becomes a 1. And that leaves me with 1 times x plus 2 in the numerator and then a -1 in the denominator. So we're kind of like, oh, how do we write this? Okay. So you could write this a couple of ways. We could just acknowledge that we have this negative. We don't want to write this as a fraction because anytime your denominator is 1, you generally just write it as the numerator. So what I could do is I could take this negative and just put it out front. I could say this is negative x plus 2. You have to keep the parentheses though, okay? Because the negative is in front of that set of parentheses, okay? So we could write it as negative x plus 2, or we could distribute the negative and say it is negative x minus 2. So there's your final answer. So be on the lookout for these opposites. You can generally tell pretty quickly when you have factors that are opposites because one of the factors is not going to be in standard form, okay? And so all you do is you put that factor in standard form, factor out a -1, and then typically you can see from there that something will cancel.